You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
I think that stained glass, both in a sacred space or in a secular place, does exactly what it's supposed to do. It raises the mind and the heart to something that is beautiful. You know, you can walk into a church, you can walk into a great building, and you can be illiterate. But if you look up and you see the beauty of this glass or the beauty of this building or any building that draws you up, it does just that. It communicates something that is special. And for us, I would say it communicates something that's divine.
South Dakota is like an art gallery on the prairie. And when you go into a small town, if you go into Polo or Orient or any of the small town that has a church or a courthouse, and you walk in the door and you don't know what you're going to find, and usually you are totally amazed. You're there, I can't believe I'm in South Dakota. It's so beautiful.
The Deadwood Methodist Church was the mother church for the Black Hills.
Just sit and meditate in the calm and the quiet and in the beauty of the place that those windows create.
I describe it as the scene in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy walks into the land of Oz for the first time, and all of a sudden everything just comes vibrantly to life.
South Dakota has thousands of places that have stained glass. Churches, government buildings, homes, and more. Each window, each pane, each piece of glass has a story to tell. Sometimes those stories are obvious. Sometimes the glass shares a new story every time you look at it. And sometimes the glass we find in different pockets of our state hold untold stories and hidden gems that unlock part of our history.
My favorite part of it is to go to a town that I've never been to and to discover something. And I think when I discover something beautiful, for that moment, that's my favorite window. And just that feeling of all of the special things that we have here in South Dakota that are just there for us to walk in the door.
The church itself is 150 years old. We've had a very difficult time finding out records, except what's printed on them. I think a lot of the windows were memorials from different families. The three at the front behind the altar were given by the Newton Edmonds family. He was a second territorial governor of the territory. The two windows on either side of the central window are in memory of 4 of his children. So they lost 4 children during the time they lived here. They did have 3 children that survived and lived after that.
The majority of these tall, slender windows found in the Christ Episcopal Church in Yankton, South Dakota, were created for a purpose or in memory of someone. Other windows were originally just placeholders. Such windows are called grazy windows. They often have a design like a diamond in the center, with a colored glass border, with the intent of being replaced with a more meaningful window at a later date.
So those were really kind of intended as a temporary window until someone had the money to do something with them. They probably are the most rare in the building. We have one here with a lady who looks like she's leaning against the rocks. And several people say the Rock of Ages immediately when they look at it. We have 2 windows that we call our Irish windows, and there was a Celtic interest they say in the late 1880s.
All but a few of the 25 windows date from more than 120 years ago. Their age and their diversity contribute to their value but they are not our state's oldest known windows. Those are also thought to be from the southeastern part of our state, but have yet to be found.
There's a piece of glass from the 1870s over in Groton in the Episcopalian Church. And there's the Fort Randall, and that glass is no longer there. But I think that might have been one of the first places. It was an Indian fort, I think that, and they had a chapel, and the records show that there was stained glass in that chapel. That's the oldest so far, but I'm still looking.
Unfortunately, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, historical documentation was not a priority, in that lifestyle. And so, a lot of it is by who remembers what or that type of thing. Sometimes they have, in some old archives, they'll have, well, we paid this much for them or we got them at this date. But, it's all more word of mouth, more oral understanding and talking about them than it is actually documentation.
When the county built the courthouse, they wanted to make it permanent and they wanted to make it a point of local pride. And while not all the courthouses have stained glass in them, several of them do, and they are gorgeous, and because they're public buildings, they've been kept up, not abused.
The Charles Mix County Courthouse in Lake Andes was built in 1917 after a contentious battle to remove the town of Wheeler as the county seat, which was established when Charles Mix County was just a territory. The new courthouse cost taxpayers $150,000 at the time and is an example of Prairie School architecture. The main floor is illuminated by light from a stained glass dome in the rotunda. Just down the road in Tyndall is the Bonham County Courthouse, which also showcases a rotunda with a stained glass dome.
I think everybody in this state is somehow moved by stained glass, and it influences us. We run into it in lots of different places, in not only church, but we run into it in government buildings, commercial buildings. I think that no matter what section of society that you're in, that somehow stained glass moves you on some level. It's actually as old as the earth, because stained glass occurs naturally when lightning strikes sand. And lightning heats up sand and it makes little glass beads. They're usually not very pretty colors because the oxide is sort of random. But the process of making stained glass is heating up sand and adding a metallic oxide. I think 1050 AD is the first time that it was used in a put together in a building. But stained glass is as old as the earth. From the beginning, the stained glass was pretty much put together with lead. They would solder it together. And then as time went on, they developed these pieces of lead that are sort of straight. They're called cames. And they would fit the glass into it and then solder over it.
Fusing is really the earliest form of glass in the history of man. Fusing was done, the first fusing is documented back to 1500 BCE. And fusing is just taking two or more layers of glass and heating it up so it bonds. So fused glass was in existence long before stained glass. Stained glass is I always call it a time-honored craft, and it really hasn't changed that much. In its early history of glass, stained glass was very liturgical. In fact, that's why stained glass was somewhat developed, was because in the Middle Ages the people were illiterate and couldn't read or have things to read. And so in order to tell the stories, the biblical stories, the theological stories, they developed the concept of stained glass windows in the cathedrals so that the people would have visual ways to understand what religion was all about.
Dr. Barbara Johnson is trained in literature, not in the history of stained glass. Through a grant from the South Dakota Humanities Council, this South Dakota Humanities Scholar has dedicated her time and research to a project that uncovers the stories behind some of South Dakota's most inspiring, beautiful, and sometimes forgotten stained glass.
Sometimes the churches keep records that you'll look through church histories. Sometimes there's information in the church histories. Sometimes it's just knowing what the story is. From literature. Sometimes it'll be a liturgical symbol that you don't understand. And so I've accumulated quite a library and have made use of the libraries in South Dakota as well as in Chicago at the Art Institute.
Dr. Johnson discovered that sometimes these windows do more than tell a story. The windows can unlock the mystery to early homesteaders and communities past.
Sometimes you'll see, especially in the Garden of Gethsemane pictures, they'll use native plants. That's very helpful for a stained glass scholar because that helps you determine where the window was made. That if you're using American vegetation, lots of times you'll go into towns, like I was in a town in Nebraska, and they insisted that the window was made in Germany. And I looked at the window and it was American vegetation. And it ended up that it was made in St. Louis. It was an Emil Frey window. And old traditions, people are very attached to their stained glass. But I was able to identify, it wasn't a signed window, but I was able to identify pretty much where it was made and who made it based on the vegetation. If it's in a church, they don't sign it because they feel that that's advertising and it might be an affront to God. Usually if they're signed, it's in the back of the church, the very last window on the bottom right-hand corner. Although I have seen windows signed up in the painting itself, and again, the light has to be just exactly right for you to see the signature. Sometimes if it's a Munich pictorial painted window with a face, no one knows what Jesus looked like. Nobody knows what Mary looked like. Nobody knows what St. John looked like. Or nobody knows what the face of an angel looks like. And so the stained glass people who make them are usually German artisans. They will use the image of their wife, their mother, their father, their child. And so they'll personalize the windows that way. And unfortunately, a lot of these stories, unless you know who's made them, those stories are being lost because they don't write them down.
The Tiffany revolution, so much of the stained glass before that was all liturgical. So everything was figurative, everything was spiritual, everything was symbols and saints and icons and that type of thing. As the wealth changed and stained glass became more affordable, then it started going out more into the residential and commercial market.
As early settlers would homestead in the Great Plains, stained glass would soon be introduced to Native Americans. Today, those windows still stand, and we see stories that combine Lakota spirituality with Christianity.
There are many, or several, windows featuring Katari throughout the state. Blessed Katari, who was an Iroquois maiden, who is honored by the Catholic Church. Out on Pine Ridge at the Red Cloud Indian School, where the windows were designed by the students at the Indian School, and they represent the 7 campfires of the Lakota Nation.
Just up the road lies some of South Dakota's most public windows, the State Capitol building in Pierre. It was completed in 1910 with $40,000 contracted to William G. Andrews Decorating Company out of Clinton, Iowa. His job was to decorate the interior of the new Capitol, including art glass and 9 mural paintings. On the second floor is the rotunda, which means under the dome. As you look up into the dome, the glass you see is Victorian leaded stained glass that was installed when the building was originally erected. In more recent times, a stained glass window was installed over the center front door. The window is dedicated to the 8 families who lost loved ones in the 1993 state plane crash that also killed South Dakota's Governor George S. Mickelson. The window is done in segments of 8 to symbolize the 8 men who lost their lives.
I come to work early, and oftentimes I'm the only one in the building, yet the place is all lit up and ready to go, and you can just simply walk around and still, after 17 years of working in this building, be totally in awe of the beauty of this stained glass, and then thinking of the workmanship it must have taken at the time the Capitol was built around 1908 or 1910, that they could construct something of this beauty and in the ceilings and the very difficult places.
The images in the state capitol building tell a story of our statehood. Windows in other buildings in the capital city tell a much different story from a much different time.
They're gray and yellow, and a lot of people are very turned off by these windows, but I kind of like them because that church was built after World War II during the Cold War, and society was sort of in an uproar, and we didn't know where we were, and we had the fear of the atomic bomb hanging over us, and things looked dark and gray. But what was really inspiring to me, that when you go into that church in Pierre, you have hope, because these stories, the story of the Good Samaritan, where we take care of one another, the story of the prodigal son, where we can be forgiven. These are very comforting things to have in your life. And so I really like the windows.
At the First Congregational United Church of Christ in Pierre, one window tells a much different story. The window shows Reverend Stephen Riggs preaching the first known Christian sermon in English in the Pierre area around September 29, 1840. Reverend Riggs helped create a Dakota alphabet and translated books of the Bible and hymns into Dakota. Sometimes the window story is easy to read, and other times the color of the glass is all that's needed to determine the importance of that piece of art.
I describe it really as the stained glass windows is really the Western culture's interpretation of the icon that is most familiar with the Orthodox churches. These are truly holy cards that are put in front of everybody to give them a reflection of what it is to be in heaven. Every color has its meaning and has its significance. There are rules of iconography. Certain colors can only be used for certain personages. And this cobalt blue in all these windows are only for the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's only for the Mother of God. So the moment that you see that color, you know immediately you're looking at Mary. And also you see the other colors as well. For example, Jesus is often depicted in white, representing purity. You see Joseph dressed in brown and purple, one who is the worker, who is always trying to protect and to take care and to nurture, and to also see that he was the adopted father of Jesus. And of course, then you have the halos, for instance, and these halos are reserved for the saints, that these are holy personages.
In order to get colors in stained glass, you put different metallic oxides. So if you want red stained glass, you put in gold, and that's very expensive. Red stained glass is probably the most expensive that there is. If you want blue, you put in cobalt. If you want green, you put in copper. Now the trick comes that there's secret recipes for the different colors. They might put in a secret ingredient that maybe the recipes were passed down from generations, so father told his son what the secret recipe was. Well, some of these secret recipes were lost because they didn't pass them down. Sometimes denominations don't have picture windows. And there's a theological reason for that. If you go into a lot of congregational churches, that was the descendant of the Puritan Church in New England. Congregational churches usually don't have colored pictured windows. If they have windows that are not clear glass, they're just geometric, colored glass but geometric. The same with Baptist, which is an offshoot of the Congregational Church. And then sometimes early Lutheran churches don't have picture windows because they think that they are graven images.
When light passes through glass, it comes in as a single ray, but when it exits the glass, it's fragmented. And it's fragmented by the colors that are on the glass. The light that does not pass through is trapped in the glass. So that the darker the color of the glass, the hotter that glass gets.
Flat stained glass is made from glass cylinders that are melted and then flattened. Black Hills glassblowers Peter Hopkins and Gail Damon of Keystone don't create flat stained glass per se, but rather the art of blown glass. However, the procedure in which an artist creates color for the glass is the same.
Yellow has cadmium in it, and that's what makes yellow. They're basic earth minerals. Some of the reds are made with selenium. Blue, I don't know about this particular blue, but a lot of the blue has cobalt. The darker blue is definitely cobalt. You know, if you're using the pink ruby colors, it has actual gold in the formula. So the minerals do affect the price of the colored product that we use. So we either break off chunks of bar or roll in colored chips of glass.
Oh, it's totally amazing. I mean, it is just so beautiful. You come and Hoven is basically in the center of our state, really fairly far away from any metropolitan area. You walk into this beautiful place and it was like, my goodness, how did this get here? You feel like you're far away in Europe or in some major metropolitan area. And the fact that this church is here is such a credit to the people who invested their hard work and money into bringing it here and maintaining it. They are what are called Munich pictorial style. They were done, this particular style of window was popular in the late 19th, early 20th century, and the craft was brought to America by German artisans who were trained in what's called the Munich pictorial school. So you'll see a lot of painting. They're almost like oil paintings. And these windows are also very special because they combine several different types of glass. They combine what's called cathedral glass, which can be machine made or mouth blown, which is your plain colored clear glass, which is then painted on with an oxide, and that's when you see the beautiful faces and the beautiful folds in the clothing and just the detail that you see in these windows. And then if you look at other parts of the windows are made out of what's called opalescent glass. And if you look at the South Dakota sky and the clouds in the sky and the pinks and the blues and the yellows, if you look in these windows, this artist, Carl Ryman, really sought out the pieces of glass that would represent and duplicate the beautiful colors of our prairie.
I always describe it as walking in from black and white into color. I describe it as the scene in Wizard of Oz when Dorothy walks into the land of Oz for the first time, and all of a sudden everything just comes vibrantly to life. And that's what it is when I walk through these doors here from the vestibule into the church. It's just an amazing transformation that occurs. It's just such a beautiful church that it's a surprise to think that something so beautiful can be in such a small community and such a backwater, if you like, of South Dakota.
St. Anthony's in Hoven is one example of how homesteaders used their own creative license to tell a story that better depicts the morals and values of the citizens who settled there.
When a community decides it's going to build a church and they decide they're going to have stained glass windows, they can tell any story they want. They get to pick, and they get to pick how they tell the story and what story it is that they're telling. And the story of the Annunciation window is that Angel Gabriel came to the Blessed Mother and told her that she was going to be the Mother of God. And this is usually portrayed with the Angel Gabriel, who may be holding a lily, and it's the conversation between Mary and the Angel Gabriel being informed of this good news. In this church, there is a very small representation of that, but the larger, more important window shows Joseph receiving the news, and he's in his workshop working, and the angel is shown carrying the lily, and it's obviously it has all the trappings of the Annunciation window, but the problem is that it's not really biblical. He receives it in a dream. He's asleep, and it's my sort of understanding of the people in this community. They're German, and German men work very hard, and that they are important enough to be receiving this important news, as well as Mary.
What do we know about Joseph when he was told by an angel that it was okay to take Mary into the household? What was the story? And of course, the story is, well, he was told by the angel in a dream that he was going to, it's all right. Everything is according to, but in this window here, what do you see? St. Joseph not dreaming, but St. Joseph working. So what I see here is a typical German mentality. We couldn't have a saint sleeping. That's just not right. Shows that he's lazy. I would say from the priest who was here, absolutely. He was Bavarian German. He immigrated here to the United States, and he brought with him this tradition that is European tradition on the importance of the role of stained glass window to a church. And it's very subtle because he comes back from this idea of how to interpret scripture as well as faith.
They emphasize the family and the importance of the family. They represent the sanctity of marriage. In fact, in one of the windows, the Virgin Mary has on a wedding ring, which is on her right hand, which would be the appropriate place for it to be in the Jewish tradition. But apparently someone early in the church's history felt that the Blessed Mother should have on a wedding ring, and so they scraped away enough of the coloring on the hand to make it appear as if Mary has on a wedding ring. But again, this represents the traditions and the values of the community.
From Hoven to Hot Springs, stained glass was designed to touch the soul, whether with a biblical meaning or to heal those wounded from war.
I can't help but imagine what a moment it must be for someone who's recovering from something, say like PTSD, to walk into the chapels and just sit and meditate in the calm and the quiet and in the beauty of the place that those windows create. Here, the pieces of glass are actually hand painted by an artist and then set in the lead and hung to create the image that you see. Or when you look at the tale of the Good Samaritan out of Scripture, the whole premise of the story that Jesus told was that here was this outcast that was beat up and left by the side, and no one would help him. With the VA, we're much the same way. We open our doors to care for anyone who's a veteran who has served this country, who's in need, regardless of race, creed, color, nationality, whether they're Native American, Mexican, black, white, pink with purple polka dots. We're here to care for the veteran.
For years, Hot Springs has used its stained glass windows to show its gratitude and dedication to helping American veterans. St. Luke's Episcopal Church had its beginning in 1896, with the building that stands today erected in 1902. Some of the windows are gifts, one from the Grand Army of the Republic, a Civil War veterans group. One from the bishop, and another from tourists who once visited Hot Springs.
Since you're looking at the windows in Hot Springs as a whole, I don't think you can separate the two. The chapels here have reached out and touched veterans for over 100 years. And the community has done the same with the churches and what they offer as well. When you have over 100 years of caring for veterans, it's important to include.
Private homes can also be personal stained glass museums for homeowners. Dr. Robert Farr's home has many stained glass windows, some with historical value and others with more of a personal meaning for the Farr's family.
The home was built in 1979 by the gentleman who owned the funeral home in town, and he had purchased the property where the Sisters Hospital used to stand, and from that purchase he acquired some stained glass windows from the Sisters Hospital, and he placed them in this home when it was constructed.
The windows were donated to the Sisters Hospital by Bishop Thomas O'Gorman, the second Catholic bishop of Sioux Falls, around 1901.
Well, the Pelican is my favorite stained glass window. It's both obscure in terms of its meaning, and it's the most convoluted in terms of the story behind it. The pelicans had red beaks. The tips of their beaks are red, and somehow that got associated with blood, and then a mythology developed around the pelicans. And the mythology is that the young pelicans would strike at their parents, and the parents would strike back and kill their young. And according to the story, after 3 days, the mother pelican would pierce her chest or her side, and she would bleed, and that blood would revive the young pelican. So it's both a story of resurrection, but also of atonement, the idea being that it is similar to what Christ did. He allowed himself to be pierced so that we could have everlasting life. The beehive and the bees are supposed to be symbols of chastity and purity, and that emanated from the fact that the worker bees do not mate. Bees also appear to die in the winter and reappear in the summer, so they're also considered a sign of rebirth.
One home may hold many windows full of worldly meanings, while another home may have just one window that means the world.
St. Anthony's Catholic Church was going to be torn down to build a new modern one. So they were getting rid of all the things that were in the church. And my husband owned a barber shop downtown that needed a air conditioner. So he talked to the priest and said, when you get ready to sell that air conditioner, I would like to buy it. And it was in the front of the church at the same area as this window was. And so the priest said, okay, but you'll have to take the window too. So he said, well, okay, but we had no place to put it really at that time. We put it in our root cellar where we kept potatoes and things like that, and absolutely forgot about it really until we built this house. And we were partly finished when I went to move my jars and canned goods, and I went in there and started packing those. I saw the window. What a beautiful window. So I rushed to my husband and said, we need to put that window in the new house.
Today, when Mrs. Inman looks at her window, she remembers her late husband and this beautiful home they built together. Some windows used during a much wilder time still stand today. The glass helps educate visitors of those famous or infamous characters from Deadwood's past.
Calamity Jane was laid to wake at the Methodist Church here in Deadwood. The stained glass windows that were in the church, and more particular the stained glass window that's up at the Mount Moriah Visitor Center, was one of the windows that were in the sanctuary at the time that she was laid to wake. So what's interesting is we have Calamity Jane buried in Mount Moriah, and we also have one of the windows where she was laid to wake as well.
City Hall was able to obtain several other windows from the Methodist Church in Deadwood.
The windows that are here are just 3 of a larger assemblage of windows that were actually taken from the Methodist Church. The three that are on display up at Trinity United Methodist Church are also part of that. Those particular windows were on the west wall of the sanctuary. There were two lance-lit windows followed by a circular window that was above them. And those particular windows were placed in Trinity United Methodist Church as part of an Out of Deadwood grant that occurred back in the late 2000s. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was a group of individuals that formed the Black Hills Regional United Methodist Historical Society. An offshoot was to create a museum or an exhibit called the Preacher Smith Heritage Center Collection. This small museum was located on Upper Main Street in Deadwood, and it closed its doors. The collection itself then went on to the Methodist Church, and in 2003, when the church was demolished, the city also acquired not only the church, but the collections within that particular church as well, which made up the Preacher Smith collection. Fast forward, in 2004, the city of Deadwood and the Deadwood Historic Preservation Commission created a small exhibit up at the Mount Moriah Visitor Center that focused on the Preacher Smith Heritage Center collection. The window has stayed up there, but I guess what really makes that particular window and all these other windows significant is that the Deadwood Methodist Church was the mother church for the Black Hills.
Where the Miss Kitty's is now was built in 1897, I think, if I remember right. They put these beautiful windows in the front above the plate glass windows. I was eating lunch one day down there across the street, and I saw a man with a ladder up against him. And I didn't know what they were because they were all painted. The outside of them had all been painted, and the inside had been painted too. They painted the whole thing, which actually was kind of good. It saved the lead from just rotting away. So anyway, I talked to the owners at the time, who were the Eagles Club, and told them that I would take those out and restore them for them and put them back in if they would just pay for the materials, which was basically framing and paint remover and things like that.
Lynn Naminga is a local historian helping restore some of Deadwood's history. But in his own home is a museum full of beautiful glass with its own historical significance, some from the area and others transplanted here by Naminga.
House was built in 1892 by a man named Stern, who was an attorney and businessman here in Deadwood. This window I found in Des Moines, Iowa, in the first governor's home. It was built in the 1880s. He was the first governor of Iowa. Those windows came out of an old house in Des Moines also. It was on the campus of Drake University, and it had also been cut up into apartments. And these windows were in an alley. You couldn't see them. And a friend of mine was driving a taxi cab, drove in there and saw them one night. And he told me about them, so I asked the owner if I could buy them from him, and he did sell them to me. They would date from the 1880s, I'm guessing.
Just across the street sits another house dating back to the late 1880s. It's known as the Floyd home. While these dated windows hold no historical significance that the owners know of, visitors often stop to take in their beauty on their way to Mount Moriah Cemetery. Down the road sits the historic Adams House Museum dating back to 1892. All of the windows are original to the home and have been cleaned and repaired over the years, except for one. The window in the sunroom stood as target practice for BB guns when the house stood empty. For over 50 years, according to local lore, Mary Adams plugged the holes with bubble gum. Those panes were later replaced.
It's really necessary to protect these windows in some ways. As I've traveled through the state, there are many places, especially in Zell, where I am just heartsick over the condition of the windows. They're these priceless treasures that have been subject to the elements. And it's unfortunately, it's very expensive. And as people are leaving the rural areas and these rural congregations are declining and being closed and merged with others, these windows are sort of sitting out here on the prairie, and it takes some forethought and planning on what's going to happen to basically the treasures of our state.
To give you an idea of kind of where the frustration is, but at the same time how would you say, the hope is, here is St. Anthony's Parish. I'm an accountant before I became a priest, so the very first question I asked from the insurance company is, how much would it cost to replace St. Anthony's Parish? And as of, about a week ago when the adjuster came in, he said, about $4 million. And by the way, I'd never be able to replace the stained glass window. I could build a church, but the stained glass window would be lost forever.
Some of the tragedy about stained glass in South Dakota is there's some beautiful stained glass that is just in drastic need of restoration to come back to its beauty, and there's just not money.
Some communities have celebrated the hidden treasures they have found in their stained glass windows and are keeping those stories alive. Some of our state's more rural communities, like Zell, are forced to close their doors. Dr. Johnson's mission is to learn as much as she can from the windows that remain today before they're gone forever. Her hope is to document as much of her findings for the future as possible.
At least people are thinking about now, oh my goodness, we really do have these beautiful things in our community. And yes, they really are important, and you know, we should save them. I think the next step is really planning on how to achieve the financial resources that are necessary to do such a project, and to decide what it is that you want to save. And there may be some windows that maybe aren't so important, that maybe they're not going to be saved. That's why I think my project is really important, because I've tried to identify the windows throughout the state that have cultural or historic significance for our population, and that attention needs to be drawn to them so that there's some plan on how to make sure that we are able to enjoy these for a very long time to come.
Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Aberdeen is one of many places where the windows may reveal a new story each time you look at them, which in many cases is exactly what the artist intended.
I continue to find small little bits and pieces that pop out. And you know, that's true even like when you have pictures in your own home, pictures of your family. You can walk past the same photograph of your parents over and over again, the same dress, the same suit that Grandpa wore, the dress that she wore, and then you see something unique that pops out, some little detail that you didn't notice before, and it draws you in and you want to know more about that story. And that's certainly the case here with the stained glass we have here. I keep thinking to myself, who made it? Who installed it? What was their story? I'd love to know the craftsmen who made it and brought it here, you know, putting it all together. Where did they end up? Do they know that their handiwork, their work, their beauty is still loved by generations? I mean, it's amazing. I find it a little overwhelming at times, but very grateful. It's a great gift. I think that stained glass, both in a sacred space or in a secular place, does exactly what it's supposed to do. It raises the mind and the heart to something that is beautiful. And we live in a world that needs to have beauty come through, and sometimes craziness and ugliness that the world has within it. And then you come to a place like Sacred Heart in Aberdeen, or you go to places throughout our state, and you see stained glass, even in modern renditions of stained glass, the piercing of the sun through those colors. It reminds us that there is hope for another day.
Further east in Sisseton is one church that holds the windows from one of South Dakota's most honorable sons. Chief Justice David Gilbertson explains.
My father was a minister, and so I spent a lot of time in churches that had stained glass. In fact, the church that he built when I was growing up, the whole front wall is colored glass, but because it's a contemporary design, it doesn't have the patterns that older stained glass has. The one window that is set in the wall, I acquired from an antique dealer in Sisseton, and to me it was very representative of what you would have seen in a church probably around the turn of the century. It was put in there, one, to honor my father's contribution of being the minister at the time the church was built, but also to remind the members that come into that area of the heritage they have and the contributions of their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, and probably establishing and keeping the church going.
Nestled in the rolling hills south of Sisseton in Marvin sits Blue Cloud Abbey. It was founded in 1950 by St. Meinrad Archabbey in Indiana to take over the community's commitment to the Native American people of the two Dakotas. The giant windows showcase the work and mission of the Benedictine monks who called the abbey home. The Blue Cloud Abbey closed its doors in 2012.
I didn't realize that they, had a church at the penitentiary. I don't know why, and so I called them up. I was in Sioux Falls, and I called them up, the warden's office, and said, do you have any stained glass in the penitentiary? And the warden said, oh yes, ma'am, you've hit the mother lode. Do we have stained glass? And they have beautiful stained glass that was actually made by an inmate who was serving a life sentence. The stories they tell are very moving, especially considering the place and the people who go to that church.
South Dakota's biggest city, Sioux Falls, has endless opportunities to see stained glass, including the only documented pieces created by glassmaker Louis Comfort Tiffany.
There's the Tiffany windows at the chapel at Touchmark at All Saints. Those are just very nice windows. Somewhat of it is not just the windows themselves, but it's the setting the windows are in and how the whole setting just lets the window be what it needs to be.
Dakota Stained Glass out of Sioux Falls has a mission to help restore and preserve the stained glass from years ago, like the windows they saved from the St. Catherine Drexel Church in Sioux Falls.
One of the biggest projects that I'm most proud of is the St. Catherine Drexel windows. Just because it's the first time we've ever done anything that intricate and that complicated on that scale.
Well, I've always loved glass of all kinds. I've got a huge collection of art glass and Steuben and Tiffany, and I've always collected art glass, so I've always loved glass. So this window up here got me started on it in 1970. That was my first year teaching, and I wasn't making much money, so I worked part-time as a cleaning up and painting apartments for slum landlords.
My favorite part of it is to go to a town that I've never been to, and there's a lot in South Dakota that I haven't gone to yet, to go into a town and to discover something. And I think when I discover something beautiful, for that moment, that's my favorite window. And just that feeling of all of the special things that we have here in South Dakota that are just there for us to walk in the door. In our courthouses, in our churches. Some people are lucky they have it in their homes. That, you know, I don't think I have a favorite because they're all my favorites because it's so exciting to just discover them.
We have people from all over the world that will stop in because of what they've seen on TV or what they heard from word of mouth. People talking about something that they saw in South Dakota when they moved back to California. And so they make it their mission to go see Mount Rushmore, Hoven, and then the cathedral in Sioux Falls. So it's very interesting the number of tours and tourists that we have that come through to look at this beautiful church. One thing about Hoven, the people in this community, by their heritage and by their love for their church, they sacrificed that we could have what we have right now. But the bad news is that anything ever happened to the stained glass itself, I don't know how I would replace it. The one thing that, again, we're trying to do right now as we celebrate our 125th anniversary is to preserve these windows, as you have just said. And the way that we're going to do that is by photographing them at different parts of the day so we can get the best reflection of these windows.
That's what stained glass does. That's what good architecture does. It raises the mind and heart to the things that are above. And sometimes when we're kind of down in the world and it's dark and it's ugly, we need situations where there's beauty. And stained glass offers that. And I would say it's really beautiful and it's really important because it teaches a story. You know, you can walk into a church, you can walk into a great building and you can be illiterate. But if you look up and you see the beauty of this glass or the beauty of this building or any building that draws you up, it does just that. It communicates something that is special. And for us, I would say it communicates something that's divine.